Good evening, everybody. Take a chair. We'll get started in just a moment here. I'm Father Gil Martinez, and I'm the pastor of St. Paul's. Delighted to welcome you to this special evening on your faith event on the Second Vatican Council. I got this letter, Tom. I got a letter from Cardinal Egan. He said he could not be here tonight, but he wrote this really interesting letter. He said he really wanted to be here, but there's a convocation of diocesan priests, and said he says. I hope this finds you well and continue to enjoy life in New York. As I dictate this, the winds are blowing outside, and the television announcer just informed us an hour ago that we would probably be losing electricity in Manhattan because of saltwater in the subway. That is what makes the Big Apple an adventure. You never know what's coming next. And I was thinking about that with the Second Vatican Council and with our you never know what's coming next. I've heard the story we told about Nostra Aetate, and it's a really exciting, engaging story. And we also have Matt Malone, who's the editor-in-chief of America Magazine, who will be interviewing Tom after his initial presentation. Matt's also new to America, and you never know what's coming next, I'm sure, as well. So, Tom Stransky is the Rector Emeritus of Tantur Ecumenical Institute for Theological Studies and was one of the original staff members of the Secretariat for the Promotion of Christian Unity. Began his service in 1960, soon after the Secretariat was formed as one of the preparatory commissions for the Second Vatican Council. He served with Cardinals Augustin Bea and Joanne Willebrands, the first two Secretariat presidents. In October 1960, they handed him a file on a proposal for the Council to address the Church's relationship with the Jewish people. He staffed that proposal as developed through the Council to become the Declaration on the Relation of the Church to Non-Christian Religions, the Nostra Aetate, which is translated in our time, promulgated on October 28, 1965. When he concluded his service in Rome in 1970, he returned to the U.S. and served as president of the Paulist Fathers. In 1986, he began serving as rector of Tantur until his retirement. Tom is in D.C. now, Washington, D.C., and continues to serve as a consultor to the Vatican's Pontifical Council for the Promotion of Christian Unity. And today he writes and lectures in great demand around. He's working on a book, and he needs a typewriter. He doesn't use a computer. Tom, oh yeah, you write too. So he also writes. So anyway, a good pencil. So the format for tonight, Tom will speak for about 30 minutes, and then Matt will engage in a conversation kind of interview for about 25 minutes. And then we'll have a time for a few questions to share with Tom. So without further ado, Father Tom Stransky. Thank you.
I always feel at home here because I was ordained up in the church. This is the mother church of the Paulist Fathers, still a small community, and rather unique as a Paulist in that 36 years of my priesthood has been spent outside the United States. So with that experience, you begin to look at your own country and what's going on from a distance, and at the same time try not to be so immersed in it that you ignore the present place that you are in. So my heart and my mind and my thinking, frankly, is still in the troubled Holy Land, where as a Vatican II priest, I had to carry out Vatican II decrees that the Secretariat for Christian Unity was responsible for on ecumenism, because the majority of the 2% Christians in the Holy Land are not Catholic, and with the Jews and with the Muslims, religious freedom, the misuse of religion to justify human pathologies, and to try to not be a messiah, try at least to make a contribution to creative nonviolence and working as I did very happily with Jews and Muslims and Christians. So now So now when I look back at the Vatican Council, I'll share a few reflections tonight. I remember, I misremember, I forget. I feel at times that I'm a living relic being stuffed into a talking time machine because my mind is not 50 years ago. My mind is today, you know. What I had for breakfast, I forget sometimes. But anyways, how did I get involved in this when this letter from Cardinal Egan was mentioned? You also have the celebration or the opening of the council that I was at 50 years ago last month, October, embedded amidst the observers, official observers from the Protestant world communions and the Eastern Orthodox patriarchates in a ringside seat that we all had closer to the high altar and the papal chair. John the 23rd, by the way, rejected the papal throne. They used to put the Pope on, I guess, on an elevator or something like that, and put him way up on a throne, and he just wanted a simple chair on the high altar, which was very typical of him. But at that time, no one knew what the outcome would. We are celebrating Vatican II now because we know somewhat of the outcome, even though there's a lot of lack of unanimous consensus about the meanings and the intents, and you might say the perennial enfleshments of the reforms, ongoing reforms that were called for by the Second. It's still being debated. Reform is always a dangerous word because it means change. And so at that opening, there was sort of a naive optimism. People didn't even know what the agenda was going to be. And somehow, like Pope John, there was a trust that somehow the Holy Spirit is going to sort out this mess and come up with something, a little positive for the good of the church and through the church for the good of the world. 50 years later, we can evaluate that. We know the outcome, as I mentioned. But when that outcome, or when that opening took place, I was already working 28 months in full-time preparations for that council as a staff member of this new Secretariat for Promoting Christian Unity, which Pope John created and announced on Pentecost Sunday 1960, for the first time having some positive official bridge between the Catholic Church and the then called separated brethren and their communions. 1,000 years with the Eastern churches and 450 years with the classic churches of the Reformation and the churches that spun off of the Reformation, all represented in those ringside seats there at the opening of the council. And the Secretariat was responsible to be the liaison between these observers and the going on of the council. But how did I get involved in that? I mean, a rural farm, urban guy from Wisconsin, a Paulist out to convert Minnesota, winding up in the Vatican, in a curial position, which was never my dream as a seminarian, longing to walk the trodden path of Romanità, the stilus curiae, the style of the Curie. Well, that again was unforeseen circumstance, the Paulus sent me, that was Gender Lake, by the way, was on the 4th floor of the rectory next door, sent me to Europe to try to flesh out the renewal programs that were going on, and I was more interested in the theologies and histories of both the Catholic and the Protestant missionary movements, and the relationship between the missionary movement and the beginnings of the ecumenical movement. And the best teacher I had in my life was the one who tutored me intensely, the Benedictine Thomas Ohm. One of the best because I never went to class. He, in the old-fashioned way, he tutored. He gave you books, you discussed them, he gave you more books, you discussed them, and that was it. But it was a wonderful way to learn. And I did that in Germany. It was my first contact with the German people right after the war. We're talking about 1958. So the war was still, some of the cities, Koblenz, I remember, still not completely cleaned up. Frankfurt was still not completely, Cologne was not completely cleaned up yet. And so it was my, as a young priest, an experience of the consequences of war, and being an assistant chaplain in an orphanage of teenagers who were orphaned during the war, wondering how their parents and grandparents ever accepted Nazism and what it did to their own lives as well as European lives. And so it was more that experience in the psychological trauma of these kids, but the psychological trauma of a nation, which up to that time, by the way, very seldom talked about the war. The parents wanted to get on with their lives and let their kids get on with their lives. So there was kind of a silence. By the way, I understand from those who experienced it, the same silence occurred in Israel. The first breakthrough of Israel talking about the Holocaust took place during the Eichmann trial for 8 months in 1961. Adolf Eichmann was the lieutenant who systematically carried out Hitler's program for the rounding up of the Jews because they were Jews and sending them to work camps, ovens, or gas chambers. But there was kind of a silence there. The Jews were almost embarrassed by saying that, my parents never talked about it. And 1/3 was of Israelis were Holocaust survivors and their children. There was kind of a silence that had to be broken. And so all of the anti-Semitic and Christian foundations for what they call anti-Judaism, which is a little different than anti-Semitism. Anti-Judaism is a word they coin for those who give a religious basis, a biblical basis, a theological basis for downgrading the Jews, claiming that they killed Christ, that they lost the covenant, and that they are going to be punished forever. And part of their punishment was to be a wandering people and never to have their homeland. All of this was beginning only in the early 60s, at the very time that the Vatican Council was getting concerned with the Catholic Church relationship, not only to other Christians, but also to Jewish people, and as it developed, to people of all religious faiths. That's what the breakthrough was. The Vatican Council, to me, was not planned, but somehow there was a mood that the church is in the modern world, and we even have one of the great documents by that title, but I always say it's also, maybe the title should have been The World in the Church, because the world is in the church as much as the church is in the world. And so the relationship of the real world out there are also people, people who don't claim to be Catholic, who don't claim even to be Christian, who don't claim to be Jewish, who don't claim to be or claim religious faiths in Buddhism and Hinduism, the African traditional religions, or, I was just talking to Father Matt before, or a long section forgotten in one of the documents, even longer than Nostra Aetate, was the relationship of the church to atheism. That's somewhat become silent. Whereas today we have the whole series of books coming out now, Hitchkins and Hawkins and that, on atheism. Atheism is in, but already it was being discussed at the Vatican Council because you had the European kind of atheism, which is more than just saying a secularist, which is usually a label that covers too many people in a pejorative way. But at least the consciousness was, how does the church relate to these people? They're not going to become Catholic, and so you say, well, then you forget about them. You can't say they're just potential Catholics. Their only dignity or worth is that they could be one like us. But who's our, as the French can only say, les autres? Who are these others out there? Capital A. Those others out there, and how do we relate to them? So that this sweep of a mood of looking at other peoples and their concrete circumstances. You had also during that period of the council, which had a great influence on the council, the decolonization. Over 80 nations were decolonized between 1957, the first one in Black Africa, which was Ghana, 1957. Then you had before that you had Indonesia and India in 47, 48. But then you had this rapid decolonization, which meant new nations, over-optimistic about their new beginnings, but at least they couldn't just keep on blaming the colonial powers. They had to find a new life for themselves, how to govern themselves economically and not be dependent, and throw away those old talks about colonial powers. You know, now we're in charge. This had a great dynamic because you had so many of the bishops from Asia and from Africa who were indigenous bishops or missionary bishops from Europe or the United States who had spent their whole lives and didn't want to go back to the potato fields of Belgium, but loved the people that they were working with. All of this is what is the church to be in Kenya? A liberated Kenya, now a free Kenya. You can see how the whole question of the vernacular in the liturgy was a concern with the, you might say, decentralization of the church in order to respect the liturgical forms that could be developed out of these various cultures. Now we're seeing just the opposite return, where each little word has to be uniform, whether you're in St. Paul's Church or whether you're in Kenya. So, but at that time, the idea was how do you decentralize, and one of the symbols of that, maybe overestimated, one of the symbols of that, because most people could caught on, was putting the Eucharist and the sacramental life of the Catholic into the language of the people, but not just the language, but the customs, the liturgical dances that you find in the Congo, and all of that. That movement was going on, and so the Martin Luther King, right around in those 60s too, the beginning of the anti-racist marches and speeches and leadership, which in a way brought the Catholic Protestants and Jews together for the first time, as far as I can date it, after the first session of the council, already planned before the council began, and in Chicago, the National Conference on Religion and Race, which had the authorization of the American hierarchy and It's a great conference, and that was the first breakthrough. We're talking about 1961. In other words, it's not just the Jewish question, it's the idea of any kind of racism or discrimination, whether it's tribal, the remnants of tribalism still existing in Africa, whether it's based on the class system as in India, but wherever there's discrimination based, and at that time they didn't bring it in too much, which they do now with the discrimination based on sex, that did not enter into the council discussions as much as the one based on color, religion, nation, and how would you put it, economic class that you found. That was going on at the time. And so you have to put each of these subjects into this larger context of the world in the church. Right after the council began on October 11th, on October 13th, unknown to us, the Cuban Missile crisis began. John F. Kennedy then announced it the 23rd, shook up the whole world. That's when nuclear war was on the brink. It was not a fiction. It was not something over there or to come or maybe. It was right on the brink. And St. Peter's Basilica was a very little fragile piece of dust. And one to consider the whole world could be inflamed in nuclear. And we're discussing the vernacular of the liturgy, and so what we're going to sing as we can blow it up and sing our Lord have mercy, and rather than Kyrie eleison. And so you had, but that really shook up the mood. It was the first instance where the bishops realized that we have to treat this question of peace in the modern world in a constructive way, and dealing with the arms race and everything else, and not say, well, that's for the politicians. That doesn't mean we have all the answers. We have to give some moral criteria to evaluate this, which was a manifestation of the Cold War between the United States-controlled NATO pact and the Russian-controlled Warsaw Pact, the Cold War, which affected the Council very, very much. Eastern Europe is certainly, at that time, a country, an area of the world which has the long tradition of anti-Semitism, of denial under the communists, the denial of basic human rights, the religious freedom issue, and the question of the freedom of the church. The governments of Eastern Europe, except for Yugoslavia, were very, very strict on what bishops could come to the council. At the most, by the end of the council, 1/3 of the Eastern European bishops were there. From Poland, there were only 4 archbishops, and all the rest were auxiliaries. Most of them were auxiliaries. And then only depended on council to council. You'd be a good boy in between will allow you to go next time. So when you look at the council, you have to think of the factors that prevented the reception of the council, even among the hierarchs who were in Eastern Europe and couldn't get even information because they were forbidden to print material about them. What they did was not give you permission to buy the paper. That's how they controlled the press. My parents and that are from a Czech background, and it's only after the independence of the split between Czech and Slovakia and the split in 1989 that back in '91 when I was in Czechoslovakia was the first time they had the Vatican II documents translated into Czech. So you have to realize that the Vatican Council was not received in the same way at the same time. And so the small little secretariat was was set up by Pope John, and for the first time, and because I knew Willem, do you want to put that picture, Gil? Number one. Yeah, that's the four of us. Men in white, that's Papa John. I got to know Willem in Northern Europe, and there was a whole development when he asked me if I wanted to be aboard this new ship. Little boat, it wasn't a ship, it was a little boat. And that was in August of 1960, 2 months after Pentecost. Of course, I legitimately had a right to ask the question about when will the council begin? No one knows, not even the Pope. When will it end? No one knows, not even the Pope. What's the agenda? No one knows, not even the Pope. This is the boat I'm supposed to come about. But it was a challenging. You have to know Stransky a little. I said, give me that. And create a new tradition. And what the Pope wanted and was determined is that he knew we had no map, we had no clock, we had no logs for previous things. We had to start a completely new tradition. Cardinal Bea, remember my first talk with him, said, no one can tell us this is the way they did it last year. We're beginning am Anfang. We begin at the beginning. And so, yeah, okay, let's do it. Now, the thing about this picture, I'm starting to ramble here, about this picture here. You notice the back walls, the damask on it, how beautiful that room is? Well, our first rooms, we had to wait till a Vatican family apartment moved out, and then they streakily painted it an ugly white. It looked like a dirty white. And 4 little rooms, and by a mysterious interior changing of the walls, we had 3 huge bathtubs, which served as our archives for a whole year. The Anglicans were in tub 2 towards the end, because it took so long to get bookshelves. But so we were in a very, very simple, with a small midget parlor. And this is what we're supposed to do, is start the ecumenical movement in a positive way by entering the church into it. And the Pope John wanted to visit us in our offices. And the 2 eagle-eyed advance men came over, and they looked over the offices we had and said, this is a dump. This is unworthy of the successor of the Galilean fishermen. And so they not only suggested, they demanded that we go next door into the large reception hall of the Eastern churches, where you have damask walls, cushioned furniture, and the first and last time in this picture, I was standing on a Persian rug. And so that picture means a lot because it was a fake. But what I remember about that audience was Pope John was one who based himself on intuition. He was just so obviously open, wide-hearted, and affable, very humble with his own gifts and his own weaknesses, and he didn't like scripts. And so we had prepared this big audience, because Cardinal Bea was used to preparing them for Pius XII, where he had all these points, what you have done, what your plans are. This was going to be a working session. And So we're all going to go to work now. The Pope brushed it aside. He wanted to find out about our family backgrounds. When he found out that I was from Wisconsin and where is that and that, he began to tell me about an autumn drought that his two brothers had on their farm on the slopes of the Italian Alps. This is a big one-to-one conversation, the dialogue. So, but this is the point that guided us all through the council. Eventually, completely unknown at the time, that 3 of the final 16 documents would come from the bathtubs. Later enlarged to larger quarters, of course. It says, conquerite il terreno, tuo terreno. Conquer your own turf. Don't bother me with details. That's how I interpreted that. Secondly, take your own initiatives. Don't always be asking me. Take your own initiatives. And thirdly, trust my trust, Pope's trust. Trust my trust in Cardinal Bea's wisdom and prudence in his judgments. Arrighi on the left side there, he summed it all up as we were walking back to the office. He's very, very witty, a raconteur from Corsica. He had all these wonderful raconteurs that would make Jane Austen, or Rabelais seem like Jane Austen. But anyways, he said he's telling us to learn ourselves how to dance on eggs. The image I had in mind, my retort, was from P.G. Woodhouse, is that once you climb on a tiger's back, you should carefully consider your next steps. But at least we were on our own, and that's really what did it. Right after, so that audience, right after the Secretariat was announced, you had a visit to the Pope, a private visit by an eminent French Jew educator whose textbooks on French history were used in every classroom and gymnasium, we might say high school level in France. And he lost his wife, his daughter, one of his brother-in-laws, sons-in-law, while he was away from home. Lost them, didn't find out their fate until after the war. They were sent to Birkenwald, so disappeared in the oven cellar. But his whole concern as an educator was how much anti-Semitism is in the textbooks. And is this true Christianity? He says you don't have to become a Jew, but is this what you really believe? Because as I read the New Testament, it isn't. And therefore, here is a chance perhaps that a small tendency can overtake the major tendency, which still is a very anti-Judaic, found in catechisms, in Holy Week commentaries, and all of that. So he saw the Pope and said, there's a possibility. And the Pope was listening to him, and he says, you're right, we have to do something. And then he said, see Bea, and then Bea saw him, and this was in September, and we were already in the office, and got this new mandate. Now that was very unusual because our mandate was the unity among Christians. The experts that we had, the bishops we had, were noted for their ecumenical work, not for Jewish relations. And so this was suddenly thrust on us. It was thrust on us in such a way that knowing the political situation, the Pope said even the fact that it's on your agenda should be secret. Even the fact that it's on your agenda. Now anyone that knows Rome knows that the best way to get a a fact out is declared a secret. In Rome, it's true. In Rome, a secret is either too good to keep or not worth keeping. But it's going to come out somehow. So the word got around that the Secretariat was going to be involved in this. Immediately, we found the beginnings. It was my first experience that still exists to the day, but all during the council was from the Arab nations. That immediately said, what's going on here? Because in the Middle East, religious politics and political religion are such that there's no such thing as purely religious. And every religious act is a political act. You can pick up an Israeli newspaper today and find the same thing. Any religious judgment by a rabbi in Tel Aviv is a political act. And the political act's got a religious implication. So, for the Arabs, any kind of council support for the Jewish people is going to be political support for the state of Israel, whom we regard as a neo-colonial power and achieved part of its statehood by ejecting over 800,000 Palestinians into refugee camps in Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, and Jordan. So how are you going to treat the issue? For the Jews, on the other hand, any religious statement regarding, in a positive way, the Jewish people would be a support for Israel and a support for the Jewish people everywhere that regard, in some way, Israel as their ancient homeland, and they don't have to go there, but it's a place to go to if you have to. And so he had this two political irreconcilable forces that played its role all during the council, especially on the Jewish statement, of take it off the agenda. There may be reprisals on church properties and by Muslims, church properties and on Christians. For the Orthodox, in the Middle East, most of the Muslims, unless they're educated, all Christians we're just all one, always fighting with each other. We're still one. So, just as you're having an ecumenical rapprochement and closeness, especially in Syria and Lebanon and in Jordan, somewhat in Egypt, between the Orthodox Christians and the Catholic Christians, whether the Eastern churches or the Latin, just at that time, the making a statement, the Catholics making a statement, they're going to say that all of us made that statement. And so the Orthodox also was saying, get the thing off the table. So there was a very genuine pastoral problem, a very general pastoral problem. The Eastern churches always felt, since they were a minority, only 10% of Catholics in the world, always trying to be dominated by the Latin, and never listened to our sensitivities. And they were worried that this was going to, it's a pastoral dilemma, at the same time a moral dilemma, or a moral question, because silence would be a cop-out. It'd be like the church is copping out by silence during the persecution of the Jews in Europe. You see the problem. I would say that's the number one problem that you had of the world in the church, is it's trying to discuss a biblical understanding of what is the relationship of the people of God, whom God still loves, as Paul says in Romans 11:29, that's the key sentence, I think, of the whole decree, that God still loves this people. He does not renege on his promises, and the people of the new covenant. What's the relationship between? That's still being part of the dialogue. So the ups and downs of this short little statement somewhat typifies, to me, when I look back on it, it's only 1,141 words, Latin words, in 41 long Latin sentences. I can't do it anymore. I used to be able to show off and recite the whole thing in Latin. But now I go Nostra Aetate. But in any case, it's the shortest of all the documents, had the most turbulent influence, turbulent history, back and forth, take it off the agenda, put it on the agenda, compromise, gut it. At one time, the order came down, gut it, take away the deicide word, God killing, just say that we love all peoples and also Jews. And it was back and forth in a struggle. But the positive thing on it, I thought, was that the objection to it from from most of the bishops was, we live in Asia, in fact, we've never met a Jew. And so, this whole Jewish question is a European question. And the whole Holocaust is European. Why drag us into this? We're living among Hindus and Buddhists. The Arabs are saying, why the Jewish and not the Muslims? And so, no one else would handle the hot potato. So we, the Synod Secretariat, out of its bathtubs, began to not only deal with the Jews, but also bring in experts and not claim that we were the experts on it, on Islam and on these other world religions, so that the Nostra Aetate, the biggest breakthrough in the history of the church in that document, is not only what it says in chapter 4 on the Jews, but that it's like Cardinal Bea used to use, like a mustard seed that flowered into an open tree in which you're trying, the mind and the heart of the church, not just the mind of the church, is trying to figure out, how does God work through these people? What's God's relationship to them? Primary to the church's relationship to these peoples is what's God's relationship to them. And therefore, if it's God's relationship to them, how does that affect our relationship? In a way, Vatican II is too church-centered. Oh God, so, gee, I could go on forever. So we'll stop there and turn it over to Father Matt here. If you would, if you want to come up here.
I am, can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
I'm of half a mind just to sit here and let you continue, because it's really fascinating listening to your account and your insights. I mentioned to you when I came in, Father John Long, the Jesuit, who joined the Secretariat, I think, a year or two after this photo was taken.
April 63.
63, yeah. And he happened to be the very first Jesuit that I met 10 years ago when I arrived at America House as a novice. Yeah, he was the very first Jesuit that I met. And now 10 years later, I returned to America as editor-in-chief, and one of the things that hangs in the office of the editor-in-chief of America is this signed photo of Cardinal Bea that was brought back from Rome by Father Long. And so I'm pretty sure that's him. You know exactly like. Could have been taken the same day.
The Cardinal and the Pope were 80 years old, by the way. They should be playing golf in Florida.
That's extraordinary.
These two old men.
Yeah. I mean, one of the questions that occurred to me while you were speaking was, and you actually talked about this a bit, was you worked at the Pontifical Council for Christian Unity. So, and I understand that the reason why you picked up these additional responsibilities, right, has something to do with the where you had the lack of resources or whatever. But was there some some theological reason why the relationship with the Jews and with other major religions had some bearing on Christian unity? I mean, was there some thought that perhaps we need to, before we get our own house in order, we have to figure out things with our neighbors?
Oh, that's a good question. As in so many instances, the theology comes after the fact. No, it was the majority of Jews, by the way, on the eve of the council, were frightened because the past councils of the church, especially the medieval councils, even prescribed the wearing of the badge. There are very harsh legislative things against the Jewish community. Sometimes the popes were protecting them, but usually the whole thing. So when Pope John said New Pentecost, they said, you know, like every other council is a Pentecost. They said, hey, wait a minute. And so most of the Jews were writing against it and even forbade any theological discussion. Most of all of the rabbinical groups in Europe and here in the United States, Synagogue Council of America and that, were explicitly, openly saying we're against any going to Rome to see what's taking place. We're interested, of course, in any moral cooperation we can have, but nothing theological. The gulf is too deep. There's only a few secular agencies, although there's religious members of them, like the American Jewish Committee, the B'nai B'rith International, B'nai B'rith America, the American Jewish Congress, World Jewish Congress, and that were interested in the council. And on the religious side, the great Rabbi Heschel, Abraham Heschel, who later really became a leader, who took the opposite theological, halakhic they would call it. The Jews do not theologize. They say what should be done, and then the theology is behind the action. You don't say theology and then you act. You act orthopraxis, would say. He would say that no religion is an island, and that God does not want little religions floating around by themselves. There has to be some sort of interaction. So he approached it at a much deeper level than just saying that we have to clean up the anti-Semitism. So that's why the Secretariat was a question mark, because they say, all our lives we've been fighting against conversion and any sort of subtle way of enticing us to make life easier by becoming Christians and Catholics. And now they have a Secretariat for Christian Unity, and they're placing the Jews under that. So it was a great problem. And it was only after the council when they realized, when the Jewish organizations realized that we either have to be with the Muslims and the Buddhists and all that, but we have a special relationship and we feel safer with the Secretariat, but they set up a separate commission. It's called the Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews. So it's a little distance from that.
And there is that sense in the document, isn't there, in Nostra Aetate, that the church's relationship with the Jewish people is really sui generis, right? It's distinct from its relationship, and more intense, obviously, than its relationship with the other world religions.
Yeah, the church is less church if it doesn't respect and appreciate its Jewish roots and the Jewish living tradition. The church cannot exist without being Jewish in its origins. And even Jesus and the disciples and Mary, most of the disciples in that were Jewish, Mary. And we're not just talking about individuals, the Jewish people at the time. So that there is that's a clear distinction, is that there's a special relationship to them. When you deal with discriminations, that applies to everyone. Anti-Semitism is a specific form of discrimination. You don't say that the rest are lesser types. It's a specific form. I would say it's equal to the rest. but we have more responsibility. But it's a good point that they were, the Jews had a great influence at the council. Few of them were, they had representatives there, some very, very good men that they had. But they were always in a difficult position, and we had to guide them, because if they operated too visibly, then they would be accused by those who were against the theological changes that were made as being the Jewish lobby that's buying off Vatican II. They even claimed that Beja was an old Sephardic Jewish name. He had a thing changed when they moved to the Black Forest or something. You had these accusations of the Jewish trying to control, and we have lost control of it. At the same time, they had a great interest and they're a great help. And of course, they had influence in the press. One forgets I don't see how Vatican Council could have had its effect if you didn't have the press at the time. It was not just something on the side.
So there was a lot of fear and surprise, as you say, involved in the events as they unfolded. And were you in some way surprised or I don't know, afraid even when you learned that the Pope was so insistent that the Council reconcile itself with its Jewish brothers? I mean, did that strike you as well? I never expected that was going to happen.
One of my first obediences, I don't know where I had the energy. One of my first obediences, read through over 9,000 pages of wishes and desires of a questionnaire that was sent out in '59 to every bishop, to every male, not female, every male religious community, every pontifical university, about what is your desire for the council. Our first meeting, plenary, in November 14th or 15th, 1960, we had outlined 10 points that we were going to look at to try to help the council see communion under two species, the vernacular, the restoration of the diaconate, the balance between the Pope and the bishops, the role of the laity in the church. It's an amazing 10 points when you look at it, of our original program we had. The concern was so my obedience was to read through this and take notes on anything that dealt with these 10 points. And on the Jewish question, there was nothing. Not even from the German bishops, from the European bishops. I reread those about 3 years.
Nothing from any of them.
None. There was only a reference to by a German bishop on racism, but nothing specifically anti-Semitism. Now, if you're only judging from that, because there were various reasons why they didn't think it was should be on the agenda, or it wasn't like, why didn't you put it on the agenda? It didn't occur to them. And I was saying to myself, did they ever read Anna Frank's diary, or did they ever see Spencer Tracy in the Nuremberg trial, or was that forbidden to their pious eyes? And what? I couldn't figure out where this was coming from. In other words, for me, it was coming too soon.
Interesting.
The frightened, for the Jews, it was coming too late. Most of the Jews.
Yes.
It's too late. You've had your chance, and all you're going to do is maybe repeat with more politesse, as the French would say, a little more politeness, what you've been saying all along. How are we going to trust that you're going to make a 180-degree turn on this?
So who was then the decisive force? Was it Pope John who said that we're putting this on the agenda?
Oh, it's Pope John. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Oh. No, but Bea was very supportive of it. They worked together. Pope John was, he worked on intuition. He called the council, and only his temperament would have called the council without lengthy feasibility studies and and planning committees and all, who's going to chair this and all that. He said, let's have a council. And then the historians, there's a German that has a 2-volume work out, talk about footnotes, Fußnoten, all full of footnotes about why he intuitively suddenly called the council. I mean, so after the intuition, you have people start analyzing it. But he had a sense of intuition that was a great gift. And he sensed when Jules Isaac took the initiative, it wasn't he said to Jules Isaac, Isaac was the one, it was the Jew that pressured the Pope to start to think and intuit, whatever it is, it should be done. And Bea is the best one to do it. So you talk to Bea, he knows more about that scripture in the Old Testament, because he was an Old Testament scholar and that than I do. But at least, and then Bea and John got together and did it, so that it was taken off the agenda just prior to the beginning of the opening session, when Israel announced kind of garbled announcement coming out of Israel. I remember Willenbrand's coming into my room steaming June 12th, 1962, just before the opening, where Israel announced that it was sending an unofficial representative to the council. Now, the observers that came to the council were churches, but here was a political act. So naturally, the Arabs are up in flames. Are you hiding stuff from us? Especially the Secretary of State. And because all of the Arab states except Saudi Arabia and Jordan at that time had representation for the Holy See. And so they had a right to go to the Secretary of State, make the complaint.
It seems like, just a couple more questions and then we'll open it up for comments or questions from you all. It seems like, you almost had this impossible job to do, because there's an attempt here to kind of reconcile two things, that that God sort of universally wills the salvation of all human beings, and that this salvation comes through Christ, and trying to sort of hold these two things together in tension. And I guess
Still in tension.
It's still in tension, right? And I suppose it always will be. But much of the history of the last several decades is, what part of that do you emphasize and what do you not? And so I guess I'm wondering, over the last several decades, as we watched, Paul VI and John Paul I, John Paul II, and now Pope Benedict XVI, we've seen things like John Paul II, gathering people in Assisi. We have seen his visit to a synagogue in Rome, and we've also seen things like Dominus Jesu from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and which to some people seemed like a step back. So I wonder, looking back over the last several decades, how has the spirit and even the meaning of Nostra Aetate and Ordinta Gratio, how have they fared?
Yeah, there's somewhat of a backlash taking place now on Vatican II, mainly by people that were not even born then, and somehow saying that we'd be a much better church if we didn't get screwed up by this Vatican II and all those ultra progressives. And the only one that broke from the church there is Archbishop Lefebvre and the traditionalists. The amazing thing that Albert Outler, the Methodist church historian, said it's the only time in history where we had such changes that there wasn't a split. It never happened before. He was expecting there was going to be, that somehow it held together. So that the part of it goes back to that is that with the stress on neo-evangelization, to build yourself up, you have to tear the other person down at times. It's an old habit. And so in order to build up the evangelizing church, you have to kind of downgrade who those who aren't evangelized are. Now, it doesn't mean that there's a weakness, but just as there are weaknesses within the church, and I always hold that, of course, somehow anyone who is saved, a word, by the way, that doesn't exist in Hebrew, salvation, they have a different way of looking at it. So I mean, even that is a kind of a Christian word that comes out, and it's not in Islam in the same way either. The other religions I can't speak for. But anyways, that somehow God has to be involved, and for the Christian, God is Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And therefore somehow Christ is involved. Somehow the cross is involved. How? And that's a great statement that John Paul II said. Somehow, but it's up to God to do, but God only knows how. And so I'm sort of an agnostic on that, not to be tactful. I said, I really don't know. All I know is that God is involved in all of this. And but the stress on, still you have to see, but how is God involved in their lives? And these people's lives who wake up in the morning and live a day and try to follow their conscience, how does God relate to them? But even more serious, the question was, is it despite the community or because of it? That even applied to, I remember in the seminary we weren't taught there, but there was two schools of thought, except one, that a Protestant is saved, the Archbishop of Canterbury is saved, despite being Anglican, not through his community. And because of invalidity of orders, he's going around in false clothing. He should be wearing a shirt and tie. So you do have the this idea of the communities of faith. If grace is social, relational, every grace is relational, because grace is of God and God is relationship, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So every grace that we have here in this room is relational to something, and it has to be expressed somehow in community. And God works through the community to the individual, as the individual helps the community to be more faithful to helping the individual. You see what I mean? It's a dialectic here.
And it's really the question of, is this religious pluralism that more and more characterizes the modern world?
Yeah.
Is it de facto reality, or is it a de jure reality? Is it something that is as a consequence of human sin and division, or is it actually part of God's plan of salvation? That seems to be the
It's
question.
unresolved. Good question, but unresolved. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, unresolved. You got to leave something to think about.
Yeah. Leave something for God to figure out, right? Yeah.
In what language did the Secretariat conduct its daily business? English, Italian?
You mean when we were, it depends who you were talking to. I fortunately have been blessed by various circumstances to be able to speak French, German, and Italian, and English, and a little Czech. So if I was speaking with the Cardinal, it would be in German. If I was speaking with John Long, it would be in American English. If I was speaking with Pierre Dupre and Origi, it would be in French. If we're all together, it would be in Italian. That sort of united us all together. So you'd come home for lunch and you already were speaking for all, but you didn't think of it. You just somewhat, you saw this guy, you started to switch into French. And he had to be patient with your French, because I had to be patient with his British English. So you, but for the documents, it was in Latin. See, that has disappeared. You could never have a council anymore, and even the synods, because Latin has disappeared. But for the crafting of a document, and being very conscious of word for word, you could draft it in French. Usually we use French for drafting. French is more precise. English, you can waffle a lot of stuff in English. And Italian, not only waffle, but it's like you're making love to a cabbage. I mean, it sounds very, very good to you, but what's it saying, you know? But Latin is very, very precise. I mean, French is very precise. And somehow it's easier, this is interesting, easier to translate from French into Latin, to keep the precision, including the famous phrase that I like to quote for some of the words in our documents, the precision of imprecision. You precisely leave it imprecise. So let theologians debate about it. Don't try to settle it now.
Two comments. Looking at the picture, I'm reminded of Cardinal Bea. And although we attribute a lot of the ecclesiological work at the council to people like Congar and de Lubac,
Yeah.
Bea was the writer of Divino Afflante Spiritu,
Yeah.
the encyclical of Pius XII in 1943 that really became the charter of the biblical study movement once Dei Verbum came in at the council. And I mean, Divino Afflante Spiritu made Dei Verbum possible. Bea then makes Nostra Aetate Redintegratio possible. I really think we need to thank God for Cardinal Bea because he's given us two really important pieces beyond the ecclesiological focus that came out of the council. I mean, I think
Well,
it's a great thing.
the first session of the council was a success. And even the young Peritus, the Cardinal of Cologne, Josef Ratzinger, who was a very brilliant expert, what they call a Peritus at the time, said that the epic-making session of the first session was what it could have done and did not do. It turned away things. One document was on revelation, De Fontibus Revelatione, on the source of revelation. Okay, that came up for debate, and there was such a deadlock on it, it couldn't get exactly the 2/3 vote. But Pope John interfered then, stepped in and said, this is going to be impossible to work with that. So he formed a commission. By that time, the new theological commission with Congar and that was much different than the preparatory commission. So you got a whole new group. Congar worked very closely with us, Charles Miller. I mean, these people for ecumenism and religious freedom. Well, you were sitting at, I was sitting at the feet of these great guys that you could, were so inspired you could just call them in. They'd be happy to do anything. It was for the good of the council, which meant for the good of the church. And so the Pope came in and said there must be a mixed commission of the Theological Commission and the Secretariat. And we had already prepared a document on tradition. That was beyond me. We had people in there that knew that subject quite well. Congar had written 2 volumes on tradition, so that we had a mixed commission that came up with the verbum. And chapter 6 was almost verbatim a part of what we had already finished in May of 1962 before the council opened. So it was this coincidence of documents being so weak and juridic and accusatory rather than affirmatory, and expressed more the nasty mother than the kindly mother church, that they were rejected. And the bishops felt they could reject them. Before they didn't realize they had that power, you know. At the first session, the Cardinal Gracias, I remember his statement, this very tall Indian from Bombay, saying that we're beginning to walk with our own feet. That was the success of the first session, is that you did not have it coming down from below, is that the Pope was presiding over the council with the bishops, and so it wasn't the Pope in his study and the bishops here. It was one family discussing with theologians. So actually, the Secretariat had 3 documents directly responsible for, plus the 4th document, which was a joint document. And I'm beginning to think, but you evidently knows the scripture better than I do, that the most important document of Vatican II, eventually, 50 years from now, is going to be the one on divine revelation, the one in the Bible.
Dave,
Yeah, I think so.
which was harder to write, Redinta Gratio or Nostra Aetate? I mean, which one did the council sweat more? About your office, Secretary.
What?
I mean, which one did you sweat over more? Was it Nostra Aetate or Unitatis Redinta Gratio?
Religious freedom.
Yeah.
The,
the
the
third.
debate on, it's a good question, the debate on Nostra Aetate was mostly outside of the hall.
Mhm.
It was outside. The hall was the nave of the concilic, with two bars, they had two bars. When the sermons, when little pious sermons started to be uttered like that, are very abstract, the bishops would clear out of their seats and go to two big bars, one called Bar Jonas and the other Bar Rabbis. And that's where they really found out, what was going on. There's a marvelous horizontal structure, actually, a structure of the council. But Nostra Aetate was outside of the aula. In the aula, and in the amount of time that we had to spend. It's a short document. We didn't spend that much time on it, although every word is chiseled. There's not a useless word in there. Every word, even adverbs and little connecting things there, that all has a history behind it. It's amazing. It's not a Joan Oates novel, really.
Did the representative who came from Israel, was there a consulate or an embassy from Israel in the Vatican prior to Vatican II, or was that something that has happened since then?
Yeah, that took place, I was in Israel at the time.
Repeat the
The
question.
diplomatic relations.
Yes, I'm sorry. The question was,
Yeah.
the representative who came from Israel, was there a consulate or an embassy in Rome prior to Vatican II?
No, the council,
I'm sorry, at the Vatican, right? At the
no,
Vatican.
Israel withdrew that. It caused such a hubbub. We knew nothing about it. When we got it over, the Secretary of State gets the Vatican, the apostolic delegate, Jerusalem, says, did you see what's in the paper? Well, we didn't reading us, the Haaretz reporting or anything. So we didn't know what was going on. So we suddenly got this call, but they backed away. They find a way. There's another motto that I like to use about the secrecy in Rome is that if a secret is true and known, it can't be unknown. It can only be denied.
Just way in the back.
But the diplomatic relations, which is important, that developed at the end of December 1993, where there was diplomatic relations between the Vatican and the State of Israel, but also forgotten at the same time. It was part of a strategy. I was somewhat involved in that. Also diplomatic relations with Jordan and diplomatic relations with the Palestinians. So it's really three-pronged. All the attention was given, but it was actually to try to reconcile all three warring with each other.
Yes, was the issue of considering Christianity as a denomination of Judaism ever discussed at the Second Vatican Council? Because that unity would really be a fabulous, extraordinary signal to Islam to forcing it to reform, because it has not reformed since the 7th century. So if Christianity and Judaism were one, with all the Protestants and Orthodox and so on, were all considered as one entity, it will be a tremendous signal to them that let's unite, in fact, because we all believe in the same God, we just have different names. So.
Yes, what he was saying is, was the prospect of Christianity being thought of as I believe denomination is the word,
Denomination,
a denomination of Judaism, was that ever considered?
No, that's, you know, the trick that you had with Nostra Aetate and the one on ecumenism was that you can't program too much the dialogue in the future, because to set the agenda for the dialogue, you need the other partner. Otherwise, it's like a unilateral, a lot of questions that came up on the Judaism questions, we took note of and came out with two documents, one in 1974, another one in 78. Those were already questions that were being asked. But we had many questions that now they're saying, how come they didn't discuss this? The questions that were never asked, like the one that you, that question is now being asked as a result of the dialogue. And so you didn't have all of the questions on the table before the dialogue began. Same thing with the Protestants. Because otherwise you're dictating to the Jews, this is our program. You want to join it or not? You sit down together. If you have the Jews and the Christians here in New York discussing someone, they set the agenda. It's not going to be set by France. So we had to be very careful about not projecting too much. But most of the questions, the wonderful questions that are out, my God, you could belong to a dialogue a month club. You just can't keep up with it all. Is precisely a result of the dialogue that was promoted by Vatican II. So Vatican II is not intended to answer all of the questions dealing with Judaism. Like, was St. Paul the second founder of Christianity? Was Paul a good Jew? That's all being in the debate in the last 10 years. We've never heard these questions before.
The council was a start.
Yeah.
One last question? Yes.
Father, you talked about how we're still dealing with the reception of Vatican II 50 years later. And I was wondering, especially drawing on your experience in Jerusalem for a long period, when I lived in the Middle East in the 70s studying Arabic, there was still really incredible anti-Judaism amongst the Christians in Lebanon, and even more so, I always thought, amongst the Copts in Egypt. And some of that, I'm sure, was just because of the political hostility towards the state of Israel. But I was just wondering, in terms of your dialogue in Jerusalem, whether there's been a change theologically amongst the Middle Eastern Christians that you work with.
Well, you really have two things. It's very good that you were studying that, because one of the problems is the Eastern churches have never had a Vatican II. And their strong tradition are the fathers of the church, much more than we do. Now we're starting classes to Western spirituality fathers. But for them, everything is through the lens of John's gospel, not Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John's gospel, John's epistles, and John is the one who wrote that, around 95, 100 of that, where you get the parting of the ways, and you get more anti-Jewish thing there that comes in. Although John was a Jew, it was more an internal fight. But the Eastern churches look at the fathers of the church, in which their favorite, St. John Chrysostom, was extremely anti-Jewish. But that's when they already had parted. So they're really fighting each other. So they'll look at that language. That's the first point. The second is that the political implies, again, you're back to the thing, is that any kind of favorable treatment is a kind of political act justifying what they're doing to, and then they would say the Palestinians or this or that, or what they're even doing to Israeli Arabs, what the Israeli Jews are doing to Israeli Arabs who have equal citizenship rights. But my experience has been is that the one that was turned, the ones that are most turned off by any kind of a dialogue, I would say, would be the ultra-Orthodox Jew. Because they won't even dialogue with Jews who are not so Orthodox. So I mean, the goyim, we goys were way outside. With the Christians, it's in my time there. You know, I arrived just after the first Intifada began. That began in December of 1987, the first uprising in Gaza. You had the unification of the Christians around the Palestinian issue, and had Jewish friends, because they realized that they had to have Jewish friends, that you had a lot of Jewish people who, out of their religious grounds, were also interested in some sort of peace settlement, so we don't have to raise our children with hate in their eyes towards the others. And you can't have a military culture existing for 70 years. So that kind of brought them together in a way that does not discuss theology too much. The theological discussions with the Jews, and Mike McGarry was there too, had a lot to do with that. The theological discussion with the Jews are, I would say, 90% with American European Jews who have made the Aliyah and become Israeli citizens. They're more open to it. Graduates from Jewish Theological Seminary and even the yeshiva and that. But you might say the Sabra, the religious Jew born in Israel, they're called Sabras, they would not want to get too much involved. You find much more collaboration with the secular Jew. See, the difficulty you have with the Jews, what they will admit, is that they're not just a religion, they're a people, and they're a race. You can't fit them into any category. And so they had a problem even with the title of relationship to non-Christian religions. They say, well, we're not just a religion, we're a people. We're an ethnic people that accept converts, of course, but I mean, we're primarily a Jewish people. It's a we before the I. So that the secular Jew does not have, some of my sects say, I don't have that religion hang-ups. But I know in my gut, I used to say to some of them, I said, you're very Jewish. You keep on saying that to me. He said, that's bullshit. Said, because the ethical tradition of which we're discussing comes out of a Jewish tradition. So you're still coming out of a Jewish. You didn't learn that in Paris from the Enlightenment. and so there's this mixture and dialogue, and you have to see the concrete person. One of my closest friends, Yaron, was an atheist, Jew atheist, who was the last student of Martin Buber, the great Einau, Jewish philosopher, for a while at head of Hebrew University, and great for the peace, the relationship of I to thou and not I to it, and that relationship. And he told me he's a very, very ethical person, and we used to go down and float in the Dead Sea together. And I asked him one time, he says, Yarof, I said, why don't you give religion a try? I mean, I found myself in many circumstances being the rabbi for the secular Jew, because they didn't trust their own rabbis. That's all. I mean, I got to trying to put the yarmulke on my head, but I wasn't trying to make him a Christian. I was trying to make him a religious Jew. And I said, why don't you just give it a chance? He says, no, he says, it's too dangerous. He said, I don't know how you can pull it off, but religion is a very dangerous thing. Never forgot that. Because it can really tilt towards idol worship, where you create God in your own image in order to justify what you're doing to another being. And that was his insight, which is very, very, sort of prophetic warning to him. But he's very, very Jewish.
Before we conclude, Tom brought a lot of pictures with him, and I was wondering if you don't mind running through them pretty quickly here and showing us what you...
No, push the buttons, push the buttons. Okay, now that was the opening ceremony that I was talking about 50 years ago, 1 month. I'm in the back row there, but these are the front side seats. The tribunal or reviewing stand behind were these heavy medallion, stiff-shirted diplomats, or usually ex-soldiers who lost some battle somewhere. But during the council, these were the best seats in the house. They're better than the cardinals. And this is what the observers, where the observers were. And I was with the observers and we had translators. That booth where all of those people are. But that's to show you the real breakthrough was that you not only had in those 2 years, it built up enough confidence on the part of the other churches to say that we trust that we will be handled fairly. You had access to all of the documents, to all of the discussions. We met 3 hours once a week with main drafters of the documents on the floor. Cardinal Cushing was going crazy because he couldn't understand a word of Latin. And he says, they got translators, they don't know what's going on. My friend at Harvard University knows more what's going on than I do. And so, can I hire a translator? And you had this, so they were treated very amicably. That's the reason for that picture. This one here was a working session. I'm right down there in the lower corner. That's up the point. Pope John showed up also somewhat suddenly, just to see how you folks are doing. It was very unbreaking protocol or something. Who sets protocol? So that you make your own protocol. So he showed up. That's an interesting picture because that has Father Sheeran. Some of you older people may know him, the editor of the Catholic World for many, many years, lived in this house, who was the Santa Susana Women's Guild held a reception for the U.S. bishops and the official Protestant Orthodox observers to the Vatican. In the middle there is good Father John. On his right side, is Zaka Iwas, who's the present living patriarch, Iwas the First, or Zaka the First, Iwas the First, of the Syrian Orthodox Church. We were the same age. They used to come over and change their clothes on Sunday afternoons at Santa Susana so we could go to a riotous football game together. They were getting tired of all these Latin documents. They were representing, and the one on the right there, left of Father Sheeran to the right there, Karakin Sakistia, is also was the young observer. The two that these were the two that we went to the soccer games. He became the patriarch of the Armenian Orthodox Church. So here you have a rather unique picture of they used to come to John Sheeran for spiritual advice. They had that tradition that you have to have a spiritual director, someone that you can have, and they couldn't find anyone. They came to Father, they used to come up to the apartment, and we let them alone. So they had a great affection for this very kind, wise Paulus. Okay? Now that's an example of another reception in which you have standing Douglas Horton, who is the dean of the Harvard Theological, what do you call it? Harvard Theological School? Yeah, Harvard Divinity School. And on his right is Outler, Albert C. Outler, the church historian, representing the World Methodist Council. He taught for years at Southern Methodist. And sitting there, the ecclesiastic is one of the great promoters during the council and after the council, and taking a lot of initiatives is Cardinal Lawrence Sheehan of Baltimore.
What about Bishop Fulton Sheen? He was recently in the news and his role in Vatican II, and that he possibly might.
He only gave one talk. It was on mission there, not too much. Not too much.
Busy on television.
Talking about Bishop Fulton Sheen, no. It's, you can't walk along the Tiber with a blackboard. So, okay. Now that's the pastor to show you it wasn't just Stransky at the council. That's Jim Cunningham, who is the pastor, predecessor of Father John Foley here, of Santa Susanna, addressing. He was very, very witty. You could see that they're all laughing. He came out with some remark. It's probably a Navy joke. He was a Navy commander, and every time he wanted to be witty, he had some Navy joke. Now this was the first. You know, all these firsts that take place, we just take for granted today. All these firsts. This is the first that the Women's Guild organized a reception for the English-speaking parishes of Rome. That's the first time they got together for this reception. And then they have some sort of structure, don't they, John? It still goes on. That was the first thing they organized. The Church of Scotland, the Anglican Church, the Episcopal, the American Church, the Methodist Church. I think there was one other there, one American Baptist Church. And they put on a reception so that they all could meet the observers. Because, you know, to meet an Armenian and a Syrian, and we had them from all over the world, that was a great experience for them. And the Women's Guild was very, very effective. A lot of them were, you know, wives of spouses of embassy people or food and agriculture. So they had a lot of cultural. This is not something extraordinary. They had a lot of these kind of cultural events. Yeah, this was the whole group together of those of us that were writing the final documents in the preparation and during the council. Very ecclesiastical, there's no women, no lay people. All that would change today, but we're talking about then. These are great people. They're all dead now except myself. So sometimes I say, to quote John Wayne in one of those far western barroom scenes, he says, "Don't shoot the piano player, he's the only one we got." So, we had a meeting of the Roman Curia, some people in Roman Curia that were ecumenically inclined, that since we had to build up relationships with the World Council of Churches, and that was one of my joys. I was the liaison with the World Council and the Secretariat on the staff. So I put together this meeting. You had to be sure that you got the right kind of people that were, you know, would go up there and not just sit in the corner. And so it was a very fruitful meeting, the first time that it took place, where the some of these very good men in the Roman Curia were able to see the Curia of the World Council of Churches and how they divided their work and the internationality of it and that. So, oh, the main thing there is Visser Tove on that picture before, to the left, because he was one of the great churchmen of the last century, the General Secretary, founder really of the World Council of Churches. He was always smoking a cigarette. That's why he lived to be 96. But a great man. He helped us a lot at the beginning of not making a little, not you already had the ecumenical garden cultivated by the others, and you couldn't be a big elephant starting to walk into it, trampling the flowers. And this is one of the great bishops of the council, Dennis Hurley, South Africa, great on the apartheid question, racism, everything. He's one of the leaders in the council and worked very hard on the Church of the Modern World. and I guess we were going out to lunch together. But I love that picture because I have great respect for them, and the Paulists at that time were still serving in Africa and gave parish missions in his diocese. So he had that kind of liaison with the Paulists.
This is the whole text. You wanted the whole text of Nostra Aetate. We gave you a copy. So. Tom, thank you so much, and Chad, thank you so much.